Hello, everyone, and welcome all to the Brain Health and Wellness Initiative series. Tonight, our presenter is Leanne Stuver, and our topic is the importance of lifelong learning for maintaining your best brain. My name is Hannah Doles, and along with my colleague, Nicole Herbert-Hale, we provide care navigation in the JFSA Dementia Care Navigation Program. Our program establishes an empowering environment to help improve the quality of life of those who have dementia or at risk of developing dementia, all while helping family caregivers reduce the stress and burden that often occurs while caregiving. At JFSA, we understand the importance in working with our clients' strengths and applying a person-centered approach to care, which extends throughout our multidisciplinary team of geriatricians, nurses, social workers, and geriatric psychiatrists. Nicole and I meet our clients where they're at and develop individualized care plans that help produce solutions to presenting problems. From linking persons with dementia and their families with community resources to following them with their medical management, we are their point of contact for guidance as well as a listening ear. We consider the intersectionality of one's life when creating interventions that adhere to their biopsychosocial needs and experiences. A quick note before we begin today, we will take questions at the end of the webinar, so please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to send us a question, and we will address that at the end of the presentation. We do offer CE credits, and I just want to note that it will take 30 days from the date of your application, which will be the completion of the survey, to issue your CE credit. Your CE certificate will be emailed to you at the email address you provided during registration. The email address that you use to access the webinar must be the same as the one you are providing. Entering a different or incomplete email address will prevent your CE from being issued. So if you're unsure of the email you used to attend, you can check your original confirmation email or go ahead and call Nicole or myself and we can check that for you. And I do want to note that the survey for the class or the presentation today, it may not go out tonight, but it will go out in the next week or so for you guys to complete. A little bit more about our speaker tonight. Leanne Stuver is a registered nurse with an extensive background in health education. She worked as a hospital nurse for 10 years before earning her master's degree in education. She has over 20 years experience in the planning and implementation of adult education programs at Menora Park, where she served as their director of lifelong learning. Leanne has been involved in numerous speaking engagements with JFSA, including teaching savvy caregiver workshops and facilitating caregiver support groups. She is currently the director of lifelong learning at the Virtual Brain Health Center and teaches community education classes about the importance of lifelong learning and brain health. She is passionate about educating the community in practical ways they can learn to support their health and wellness. Leanne, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much, Hannah, and thank you to everyone for being here with us tonight. As you can see from my bio, lifelong learning has been a big part of my professional career. So it's a topic that I love to talk about, and I think it's real important for all of our brain health to make sure that we are giving our brain that lifelong learning component. The fact that you're here means that you are also aware of that because this is considered a lifelong learning program. But we're going to talk about a whole lot of opportunities that are considered lifelong learning and are good for our brain. So first, a little bit about our brain. So I like these couple of quotes I found about the brain. The human brain is the most complex piece of machinery in the universe. And I think that's probably an understatement. We probably know less about how our brain works than we do about computers. We're learning, but we don't know all that much. It also has been called the greatest unexplored territory in the world. is the space between our ears. So we think of unexplored territory as being in outer space or whatever, but there's so much we have to learn about our brain. And we're going to talk about what we do know tonight and how we can use that to give our brain the best chance possible to work for us well as long as possible. So our brain is made up of brain cells. Just like our whole body is made up of cells, our brain has cells. These cells are called neurons, and scientists think they look like those kind of blob looking things with those branches. So that's what a neuron looks like. A human brain has about 100 billion with a B neurons. That's a lot of neurons that take up space in this small area between our ears. Those branches are called dendrites. They're how our brain cells communicate with one another. So those branches connect or almost connect, and either chemical or electrical communication goes on to spread that communication throughout our brain. Scientists sometimes refer to this as the neuron forest, because when you get all those branches that you can see in the picture on the right, you can see how they kind of look like tree branches, that you have that forest of neurons in our brain. So we're going to talk a lot about these neurons tonight because they are how our brain works. Even though they're tiny, minuscule, obviously they're small if we've got 100 billion in here, but they do all of the work of our brain and keep our brain active and healthy. Now, there's a term that you probably have heard, especially if you've been to one of my classes. It's neuroplasticity. And if you break that word down, neuro is brain, and plasticity, if we think about something having plasticity, it's ability to change. So this is our brain's ability to change and adapt. Now, not that long ago, 30 to 40 years ago, doctors did not think that once there was damage to your brain, that it was able to be rehabilitated. So even when I was in nursing school in the 1980s, there was not near as much rehab going on for stroke patients as there is today, or people who had a traumatic brain injury. They thought once those brain cells died, they were dead and the brain couldn't do anything about it. What we've come to learn through a lot of research is that the brain can kind of rewire itself. So those brain cells or neurons that die do not come back to life, but other brain cells are flexible and learn to do what that other dead cell used to do. So think about, you all probably know someone who has had some type of a brain injury, whether it's a stroke, whether it's an accident, and they may have lost some function. Maybe it was a loss of use of one side of their body. Maybe they lost their ability to speak. Maybe they couldn't walk. But they also probably went through some intensive therapy, whether it's speech therapy, physical therapy, or occupational therapy, and they probably were able to regain some of those skills that they lost. That is neuroplasticity at work. It's your brain teaching other brain cells to do the work of those ones that were damaged. The key to this, however, is that mental stimulation is essential. Just like you would have to work hard at physical therapy or speech therapy to regain that, in order to build this neuroplasticity and build this strength of our brain, mental stimulation is necessary. So we can't just be a couch potato and never think about anything challenging, or just watch old sitcom reruns all day and expect our brain to be healthy and have these good neuron forests. We have to work a little bit at it. The good thing is that this changing and adapting can happen through our entire life. So you are never too old to add in some challenging mental things to your brain health repertoire. So anytime you are faced with some new information or some new experience in the environment, your brain is stimulated. And it doesn't matter if you're 10 or if you're 100, your brain still reacts the same. So our brain continues to change and adapt throughout our entire life. Our brain likes to strengthen those connections that we use a lot. So when we get good at doing something, those neurons are very strong. But we can work on building new ones as well. You often hear the term use it or lose it in returns to our physical strength, especially muscles, but our brain is very similar. So our brain strengthens those connections between the neurons of things that are used frequently. And if there's something we don't use frequently, our brain kind of does this housekeeping, especially at night when we're asleep, and it kills off neurons that we're not using anymore. Now, an example of this would be, so I used to play the piano when I was a kid, and I haven't played in probably 30 years. I haven't played a piano. I could not sit down now and play a song on the piano the way I did when I was in the midst of taking lessons and playing regularly. That is kind of an example of neurons withering away and being cleaned out that I wasn't using. So I'm not using those piano playing neurons, and they got weak and they died. So it would be kind of starting from scratch if I tried to learn to play the piano again. Foreign languages are another good example of this. If you were fluent in a second language and then went 30 years and never read that language or spoke that language, you would be rusty when you went and tried to pick it back up again. It wouldn't be impossible. You could do it, but it would be more work. So that's kind of this idea of this use it or lose it as far as our brain cells go. Now, there's another really important term as far as thinking about building up our brain to be resistant to damage as we get older. And that term is called cognitive reserve. And if you think of reserve, that's kind of like that protection, that bonus that you have. And cognitive is our brain. So it's kind of that protection system that our brain has. So our goal is that we want to have lots of those healthy neurons, and we want to have lots of those branches that connect between all of those neurons, because that means that we have a very healthy communicative brain. And the thing about this cognitive reserve is that you can choose to improve your cognitive reserve. That choice is in your hands. You can ignore it and say, no, I don't want to do it. But all of us can make that choice to improve our cognitive reserve at any time. Now, to give you an idea of what cognitive reserve is, I like to use trees because that whole branch idea works well for me. So if you have good cognitive reserve or high cognitive reserve, your brain cells look like this very healthy maple tree. So this means you have a lot of ability to protect yourself against disease. Okay, let me give you an example of how that works. Imagine that this tree gets hit by lightning and a couple of branches are knocked off on one particular side. Is the tree still healthy, even though those couple of branches got knocked off? Probably, because it's a very robust tree. If we're completely on the opposite side of it and we look at it, we wouldn't even know there was damage because you would only see it on the one side. So this is an example of cognitive reserve, this high cognitive reserve. Now, by the same token, imagine the little sad Charlie Brown Christmas tree. This is an example of low cognitive reserve. Think of that same lightning bolt. If that lightning bolt hits Charlie Brown's Christmas tree, there's not going to be anything left of that tree. So it doesn't have any reserve. It doesn't have any protection. So that's how I want you to think about cognitive reserve. You want to build up those neurons and all those branches associated with it because it can protect your brain from damage. Now, let's think about the kinds of damage. So if you had a head injury from a fall or a car accident, if you had a stroke, if you had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, those would all be damaging situations to your brain. If your brain had a lot more cognitive reserve, you would bounce back from those diseases better, or perhaps they would be delayed in causing you damage. And we're going to talk about that a little bit of how scientists know that cognitive reserve is actually at play in our brain. There's a very famous study that is still ongoing. It is called the Nun Study. It's a longitudinal study, which means it goes over generations, so decades. It started in 1986 by Dr. David Snowden. At the time, he was at the University of Minnesota. The National Institute on Aging gave some of the original funding. As you can see, it was highlighted in Time magazine back in May of 2001. And what took place during this study was that nuns in a particular order, the Sisters of Notre Dame, I believe it was. Did I say what it was over here? I didn't write it down. But anyways, it was one particular convent of nuns in the original study. And they agreed to participate. And they had studies done of what their early and middle life risk factors were. And what they looked at was how much education did they have, what type of work did they do prior to coming into the convent, what type of community service were they involved in. They also agreed to do annual cognitive and physical evaluations. And most importantly, they agreed to donate their brain to be studied after they died so that the scientists could actually look at the brain and see what was going on. This particular study was very strong because all of these nuns lived a very similar lifestyle. They ate the same diet, they participated in the same types of educational and community service events. So unlike just picking people out in the community at large who might have very different lifestyles, these nuns all had a very similar lifestyle. So it evened out some of the things that they didn't have to rule out in the study. The biggest takeaway from this study was that cognitive impairment was not an inevitable consequence of aging or of disease. Why do I say of disease? Well, the most surprising thing that happened from this nun study was on the autopsies of some of the nuns' brains, they found signs of advanced Alzheimer's disease when they looked at the brain after death. However, the nuns never showed any signs or symptoms of the disease in their lifestyle. They were still active, they were still volunteering, they were still teaching, you would never have interacted with them and said, these women have Alzheimer's disease. Why? Because they had such a huge cognitive reserve. So because of their dedication to education, to eating a healthy diet, to exercise, all the important factors in brain health, they had built up a high level of cognitive reserve. And even though they had Alzheimer's disease and it was destroying cells in their brain, enough cells had not been destroyed to outwardly show that they had Alzheimer's disease. And I know this sounds really strange, but here's another way to look at it. So this chart was put out by sharpbrains.com, and the dark arch is like the normal progression of your brain from infancy through adulthood. So think of it as your cognitive performance. So when you're born and you're going through school, that arch goes up. And then once you're out of college and maybe starting to get older, it kind of tends to go down. So as we get older, we may have a few more issues with our brain performance. We want to think of that gold line. Hopefully it looks yellow or gold. That top line is what happens if we concentrate on building our cognitive reserve. We get a higher arch. And as you can see from that green arrow, that same level of where the area comes down is at an older age. So you would be maybe 85 or 90 before you showed the signs of Alzheimer's, rather than 75, where that is shown. So this idea of cognitive reserve is really important in the whole idea of possibly delaying the signs and symptoms of dementia, especially of something like Alzheimer's disease. Our brain, our healthy brain, can help protect us from being affected until later. It can delay the onset when we build up this cognitive reserve. So now you're going to say, well, how exactly do I do that? Well, stimulating environments increase the number of connections, those dendrites, those branches between our neurons in our brain. And our brain loves new and difficult tasks. Now, sometimes that may mean we kind of feel like smoke's coming out of our ears, but whenever you feel that way, that your brain is really tired from doing something, you have really built your cognitive reserve while you're doing that task. So cognitive engagement is real important. And it does not mean you have to do it all day, every day. No one can work on stimulating their brain all day. So if you look up in that top right-hand corner where there's that little stopwatch, we want to think about making our brain sweat for about 20 minutes a day. You can break that down. You can break it into 2 10-minute sessions, 4 5-minute sessions, but you kind of want to set that time aside, just like you do for physical exercise, that this is going to be my brain training time, and kind of make it your daily brain fitness routine. And we're going to talk about other things you can do that fall into this category. But there's lots of things you can do to challenge your brain, but you really want to make your brain feel like it has to work, because that is where that cognitive engagement, that cognitive reserve gets built. So try something new that's out of your comfort zone. I know a lot of us like to do things that we like to do, and we don't want to try new things, but for your brain, trying new things is really, really important. We're going to talk more about this whole lifelong learning idea in a couple of slides. But you want to think about new, novel, and challenging. And if there's something you like to do, that's fine, but think about making it more difficult. So for example, if you really like to do crossword puzzles, for that 20 minutes a day that you want to do crossword puzzles as your cognitive engagement or your building cognitive reserve, you want them to be really hard crossword puzzles. Now you're probably saying, well, that's not fun. No, it's not fun, but building your cognitive reserve isn't always fun. You want to stretch yourself. You want to take that 20 minutes and really make yourself have to think. So doing the Sunday New York Times crossword puzzle. Sunday is the hardest crossword puzzle day in any newspaper. So that's the crossword puzzle you want to do to build cognitive reserve. Even just exploring new museums, new parks, new whatever, anything new, any new environment that your brain is taking in, all that new information is challenging for your brain. So there are so many ways, and we're going to talk about them more. So when we talk about lifelong learning, I don't want you to just think about a class like we're doing tonight. This is lifelong learning, but this is only one part of lifelong learning. There are tons of opportunities for lifelong learning that can help build your cognitive reserve. I specifically don't want you to just think about classes because that narrows it down too much if you only think about taking a class. Henry Ford was quoted as saying, anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 80 or 20. The greatest thing in life is to keep your mind young. Albert Einstein said, education is that which remains after one has forgotten everything he learned in school. I believe Einstein only went through 8th grade because he was so bored. So definitely classes are not your only option. They are one option, but they're not the only one. So let's think about a definition of what lifelong learning is. I like this one. It was from a careervision.org website. The ongoing, voluntary, and self-motivated pursuit of knowledge for either personal or professional reasons. So you choose to do it, you motivate yourself to do it, and it could be for work or a volunteer opportunity, or it could just be because you want to do it. That's what lifelong learning is all about. So let's talk about some options for lifelong learning. So college classes are obviously a lifelong learning component. You could take actual full-fledged college classes. You could audit classes. Most of the colleges in Ohio let people over, I don't know if it's 55 or 60 audit classes, especially at state or community colleges for free. You can audit those. There are also colleges that participate in senior lifelong learning. So I know Tri-C has their Encore program, both at the East and the West campus, that offers continuing education classes for older adults. Siegel College as well has an older adult program, and I believe they're in conjunction with CASE. But it doesn't have to be a college class. Maybe it's a community education program from JFSA. We would fall under this category of community education programs. Libraries have a plethora of things that they offer on all different types of subjects. Maybe you belong to a civic group that has educational programs that they provide. All of those are great opportunities for lifelong learning. Many of you may participate in exercise classes, especially if you go to something different than you're used to. So if you usually go to Zumba, you are familiar with that, but maybe you decide to take Tai Chi and it's totally new to you. You've never done it before. Your brain just goes, woo, great, that's all new information. So look for new opportunities. Dancing, learning new dance steps is great for your brain because you're moving your body, both sides of your body, and you're learning, the steps in your brain. So that can be considered lifelong learning. Learning a foreign language, whether it's in a class, whether it's on an app, whether it's in a book, foreign languages stretch your brain and build that cognitive reserve. Or maybe it's just sign language. Maybe it's American Sign Language. Again, anything you do that involves your brain and both sides of your body is a boost in building cognitive reserve. So learning sign language is a great formal lifelong learning opportunity. Musical lessons, learning to play an instrument, maybe learning to play a new instrument. If you are proficient at one, try to learn a different one. You already know notes, so branch out. You learn a different instrument. That can really build that cognitive reserve. Now, if none of this sounds interesting to you, that you don't like the idea of formal classes or organized lifelong learning, that's fine. There are lots of informal things that you can do. Reading the newspaper. I realized that reading a paper newspaper is becoming a lot harder to do. I know that a lot of newspapers, and the Plain Dealer is one of them, does now have their online layout of the paper, looks exactly like the paper copy does. But here's why reading a newspaper is so good for your brain. There is a different layout of the articles and the pictures every single day. So it's not like a book that you read that the pages look exactly the same. The pages are different, the articles are different, everything is different from page to page, from day to day. So reading the newspaper is actually a really good challenge for your brain. There have been studies of regular newspaper readers, and they kind of do scans of their brain to see what happens to their brain. And their brain shows changes in growth and connectivity between the neurons as much as somebody who takes a year of college classes. So reading the newspaper is a good everyday thing that you can do that boosts that brain power. Reading books the same way, but there's a challenge with this. So if you are someone that reads a particular kind of book, so you always read romantic books, you always read science fiction books, you always read history books. The key for building cognitive reserve is to read something out of your ordinary. So if you like to read science fiction, then do something else. So change that genre. Maybe you switch to poetry, which is different than just reading a book. So for that 20 minutes a day where you want to work on building your cognitive reserve, you need to do something different and out of the ordinary. The same thing, you can play cards or play board games. Again, you should mix it up. Not always play the same card game, not always play the same board game. Maybe even pick one you don't like. I don't know how to play bridge, but bridge is a very challenging card game with a lot of moving parts that you have to keep in your head. Bridge is a really great card game for building cognitive reserve. Jigsaw puzzles are another great thing to build brain power, especially the more difficult ones. So the smaller the pieces and the more intricate the design, even if it takes you 20 minutes to find one piece that fits, you just build a lot of brain cells doing that. So you want to do an easier one when you want to do it for fun, but maybe you have one table set up in your house if you're a puzzle person that's a really hard one that you make sure you spend at least 20 minutes a day working on. Art projects. I could do art projects and it would be a real brain challenge for me because I am not very artistic. So if I really wanted to challenge my brain, I would learn to paint or learn to draw because I am not good at it at all. So you can use art projects or learn something different. If you're a painter, take a pottery class. Do that, mix it up, do something new and different. Puzzles, whether it's on the computer, on your phone, paper and pencil, all different kinds of puzzles are great ways to challenge your brain. But again, you're better off if you do something you're uncomfortable with. So if you're the word puzzle person, switch it up and do a number puzzle for that 20 minutes where you want to challenge your brain, and vice versa. Or maybe try to learn some new puzzles. There are all different kinds of puzzles out there that you can find on the internet or in cheap puzzle books at the dollar store, that you can find a variety of different kinds of puzzles to challenge your brain. Also, you can just have stimulating discussions with your friends. Anything that makes you think. You don't realize what a brain challenge it is to have a conversation with someone. So you have to pay attention and listen to what they're saying. You have to process that information. You then have to process a response and you have to give it back to them. It is a brain workout to have a conversation. And the more stimulating the conversation, the more challenging it is for your brain. So I don't know if you want to talk about politics, that may be a little difficult, but maybe research a topic and then talk about it with somebody. And there's lots of opportunities on the computer, on the internet, on apps. There's also a picture on your screen of knitting. Knitting is another great brain activity. And if you continue to ramp up the difficulty of the projects that you're working on, rather than doing the same one, it's a great brain training. So why am I stressing the importance of all this lifelong learning and all this working on building your cognitive reserve? Well, the reason is because we are living a lot longer than we ever did before. So according to the US Census Bureau, in about 30 years, the population of those age 65 and older in our country is going to be 90 million people are going to be alive and over 65. So most probably retired. So the first baby boomers turned 65 in 2011. When we think back at life expectancy, in the early 1900s, people didn't even live to 50. And now it's closer to 80. And by 2050, men will be 82, women will be 86, the average life expectancy. Adults are going to spend a lot more time in retirement. And retirement is kind of that time when we maybe aren't being forced to learn as many new things as we did when we were still working or still raising a young family, and we were always learning new things in that process. And retirement and getting older is a time where we're kind of thinking, well, I just want to relax and do the things I enjoy. Well, that's okay. But because we're spending so much more of our life in retirement, we don't want to forget about our brain. And we still want to have a healthy functioning brain for as long of that lifespan as we have. So we want to think about keeping our brain challenged, even though we're retired, so that our brain continues to work well for us. We could maybe spend 30 plus years in retirement. So that's a long time if we're not challenging our brain, that it could start clearing out those neurons and we could lose a lot of that cognitive reserve that was built up when we were younger. So we want to make a conscious choice that we want to keep our brain active and engaged throughout our entire life, so that our brain works well for us as long as possible. This just is an infographic that kind of summarizes a lot of the things that we talked about. So, exercising our brain helps with our memory, helps with our attention, helps us concentrate, helps us problem solve. We all want to be able to do those things for as long as possible. So by doing these cognitive engagement and lifelong learning opportunities, we keep our brain being able to do those things. As we've talked about, it cultivates new neurons and neurons that are able to do better things. It can keep us connected with other people. A lot of these lifelong learning opportunities we talked about, you don't have to do by yourself. You could do them with others. You could do puzzles, games, classes, almost everything we've talked about, you could do with another person, and that social connection boosts your brain power as well. You want your brain to be as flexible as possible, and you want it to be healthy for as long as possible. But it's definitely shown that keeping your brain health in the forefront decreases your risk for brain decline as you get older. And you really want to make it a daily practice. So think about finding a time during the day. Many of you probably have a time that you do your physical exercise, because when you make it a habit, it's easier to stick to. Maybe you're an early morning person. Maybe you're a late afternoon exerciser. Pick a time for your brain exercises that work well for you and set that time a day. Maybe put it on your calendar, maybe set a reminder on your cell phone, but set aside that time each day that you're going to dedicate it to make your brain sweat and build that cognitive reserve. There's a book called Maximum Achievement, where the author writes, "Today, the greatest single source of wealth is between your ears. Today, wealth is contained in brain power." And think about that. I know we all want to be financially well off, but think about what your brain working well for you means to you. I think oftentimes we don't think about what all our brain does for us until it starts to not do it. And then we realize that we wish it was better. And I want you to think about that as a proactive approach, that what can I do to keep my brain as healthy and robust as possible for as long as I can. So what do I want you to take away? I want you to try new things, whether it's hobbies, whether it's puzzles, whether it's classes. Try something new. Your brain loves to do new things. Have stimulating conversations with family or friends, and try to set aside time every day for 20 minutes. Even if you break it up, that's okay. But try to really set that time aside to challenge your brain and build that cognitive reserve. Now, when you get the survey, you will get a copy of the slides, or after, you'll get a copy of the slides in a PDF version. And you will have the links for these 3 resources that will help you learn more about this if you want. So there's a book from the Dana Foundation. The Dana Foundation is all about brain health. And there's a great booklet they put out in 2017 called Successful Aging in Your Brain. That's a free download on their website. That is great. Has a lot of the information we talked about today and a lot more on other topics. My partner at the Virtual Brain Health Center wrote a blog on our website about lifelong learning. So I gave you a link to that blog. And also the Alzheimer's Association has a great tour of the brain on their website, both a tour of the brain and also a tour of what happens to the brain when you have Alzheimer's disease. And it clicks through, it's not really a PowerPoint slide, it's a interactive part of their website that teaches you more about your brain and the importance of cognitive reserve and why it protects you against dementias like Alzheimer's disease. So I included a link for that website as well. If you're a brain geek like me, you might enjoy looking at all the different things your brain can do. They do a really good job of describing it, so it's a good resource. So hopefully if you want to spend your 20 minutes a day learning more about cognitive reserve and neuroplasticity, you can check out some of those websites as something new that you can look into. I'll open it up to questions now, though. If there is anything that I can answer that didn't make sense, or you would like to comment on more, I'll be glad to hear your comments or answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Leanne.
Mm-hmm. You guys all got your 20 minutes in today, because this program was longer than 20 minutes. So you checked it off today.
Well, I do have one question. Are some sorts of lifelong learning more helpful than others in supporting brain health? Is one better than the other?
No, not really. It's basically whatever is a challenge for you. So we all like different things. And some of us maybe do a lot of different lifelong learning things, and some of us maybe don't do any. So there's really, the research doesn't show that any one thing is better than another. It's more that it's challenging and that you expose your brain to new things. So it's not like you sit down and do the same level of a crossword puzzle every single day. It's that you mix it up, do a harder, a different type. So no, experiment, see what gives you the most challenge, what you can, I mean, you have to enjoy it a little bit or you're not going to come back and do it. So you need to pick something that you'll stick with, just like physical exercise. If you hate an exercise, you're not going to stick with it. So don't pick something you hate, but pick something that really challenges you. But no, the sky's the limit on new and challenging things you can pick.
Great. How long does cognitive reserve last?
That is a good question. I don't know that there's a definitive answer out there, because it kind of comes back to that use it or lose it thing, that you know, when you build cognitive reserve from certain things, if you don't do it again, then some of it declines. But if you make this a habit, that you do this 20 minutes a day as often as you can, then you're constantly at least maintaining your cognitive reserve. So think about maybe a time when you've been sick or under the weather and you haven't done your normal activities. Your brain may kind of feel sluggish when you get back to your regular activities. That's kind of, as soon as you take a break from it, you start losing some of that cognitive reserve. So I don't know that scientists can actually tell you how long it lasts, but I mean, it does go away through that use it or lose it, you know. So you always want to be working on it, but I don't know that there's per se it's going to last 5 years. I don't think scientists have been able to say that, but they know that when you keep doing challenging activities, you may not continue to build it, but you maintain. So you maintain that cognitive reserve. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. A thought I had on that with the pandemic, we noticed a lot of changes, things we used to do. So I'm curious if there was any study or anything about cognitive reserve and the decrease in that during the pandemic, or anything you heard of with that?
Yeah, I've read a lot about it because there's a lot of information out there about COVID in the brain, and especially about the social isolation that has gone on because of the pandemic. And that social isolation piece has definitely been a detriment to our brain. However, from things that I've read, we actually have way more opportunities to build cognitive reserve and to find online virtual learning opportunities than we had prior to the pandemic. And I don't think they're going away. I think a lot of these virtual opportunities are going to remain. So for somebody that is maybe more isolated, physically isolated, they can still boost their cognitive reserve through virtual things. So I guess my answer to that is, if you are isolated from other people, you are going to find it hard to maintain your cognitive reserve, because talking to other people is vital. but it can be virtual that you talk to them. So the whole idea of the pandemic and being cautious about COVID does not have to stop you from building your cognitive reserve. There are more virtual opportunities now than there ever were before. And people were isolated before. And now, because of our technology and because of smartphones, I mean, so much is at our fingertips with our phones. You don't even have to have a computer. You can do a lot of things. So I think the pandemic has actually provided more opportunities for lifelong learning and has made the ability to do it virtually help more people than it has harmed people, in my opinion.
Great to hear. I know we never would have done this brain health and wellness virtually had we not had the pandemic. We did a lot of things in person. So
right. Yeah.
We all had to adjust a bit.
Yeah. And so. I mean, in Northeast Ohio, how many of us only went out and did things when the weather was good? You know, in the winter, maybe we didn't do as many things. Now there's opportunities year round that people can participate in different things. So I think it's kind of been a blessing in disguise for lifelong learning that there are even more opportunities now than there were before.
Thank you. Another question came in. I want to spend my free time doing activities I already know I enjoy. Can I still build cognitive reserve without trying new things?
Yes and no. So I'll start with the no first. I'll say no because you need to try new things for your brain. But yes, as long as you do one thing. So let's use the example of crossword puzzles. You want to do crossword puzzles for your brain training. Great. You enjoy them. You like them. You need to ramp up the difficulty level when you do it for the cognitive reserve piece. So if you're willing to do that and make sure you do something really hard, then yes, you can still build cognitive reserve by doing the normal things that you do. But if you always go dancing and do the same dance, you have to do a harder dance. So it's kind of a yes but no kind of answer. You need to think about difficulty level. If you're not doing as varied of things and are doing more limited types of things, you need to make sure for parts of the day you're doing a harder thing in that level, like a harder knitting pattern, a harder crossword puzzle, a harder jigsaw puzzle. You need to ramp up the difficulty level of that same thing you're doing in order to still get that benefit.
Thank you. I think we got time for one more.
Okay.
Are virtual opportunities as good for my brain as in-person events?
Yes, they actually are. Probably 10 years ago, I would have told you no. But even prior to the pandemic, as I was working in senior living, and with my parents here at home, as they got involved in some virtual opportunities, I could see that it benefited them. And then I think that's really been demonstrated during the pandemic. So you do not have to go to a class in person. I know we don't have really the social interaction component in this class because it's set up as a webinar, but there are lots of classes and opportunities on a virtual platform where you can actually talk and interact with other students. Those are the ones that I would look for as far as increasing conversation between people. But you can certainly find probably more subject matter out on the internet in a virtual format than you can locally
Sure.
at local classes. So I think the whole virtual opportunity thing has just blossomed lifelong learning opportunities. And there's a lot of free ones out there too. It doesn't have to be a cost. So, just Google lifelong learning and you'll be surprised. There are a lot of free places out there that offer lifelong learning opportunities. So just look for them virtually if that's more your preference.
Great. Great. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thanks everybody for being here for this.
I hope you all take something away from that because there are a ton of opportunities out there.
There are.
Yes. All right. Well, before we close up today, a little bit more about our dementia program that we do have at JFSA. Nicole and I are care navigators for the program. We work very closely with families who may be caregiving for a loved one with dementia. And we really work with the family one-on-one to provide different supports in the home. The goal is to remain at home as long as possible. So we do work with families to try and do that. We have two geriatricians that work from us, Dr. Elizabeth O'Toole and Dr. Constance Magulius. They work very closely with Nicole and myself to bring different recommendations into the home, like I mentioned. So they're a wonderful resource for us to have with this program. Frank Petrelli is our psychologist. He does our dementia assessment testing. And then Pam Lynch is new with us. She is a retired social worker and health educator, and will be working with us in the new year to be facilitating our new educational workshop called Caregiving with Confidence. So more to come on that. Hopefully in 2023, we'll be rolling that out in the next few months. We also offer a dementia support group, so caregivers are welcome to come to that. It's a drop-in style group offered the second and fourth Mondays of the month at 1:30. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to Nicole or I to register. We do offer, like I mentioned, our care navigation services. We have a lot of other services for older adults that serve the community, such as home delivered meals and home care, lifeline services. So if any of that sounds interesting, or if you'd like more information, please reach out, as well as our Brain Health and Wellness Initiative series. Next month, one of our geriatricians, Dr. Elizabeth O'Toole, will be joining us. Next month, it will be back to our normal routine. So it will be on January 26th at 6:30. She'll be talking about really new developments with dementia and research in the field at this time. So again, here's my contact information as well as Nicole's. So please feel free to reach out if you'd like to register for any of the programs we mentioned or would like more information. Thank you all for attending tonight.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.